So a very long time ago, back when I used to have hair, I featured a plugin called Odin 2 on my channel. And today TheWaveWarden is back with another amazing synthesizer, so that is what we're going to have a look at. So this is the plugin. As you can see, it is layout-wise pretty similar to Odin, if I recall correctly. It did also have 3 oscillators up top, 2 filters in here, then a routing area in between. This is more of a general area, and then we have modulations at the bottom here. We have 2 separate tabs, one for the amplitude stuff and the effects. And then we have another tab for the modulation matrix, which is currently empty. And that is going to be the tour of the entire synthesizer, because within this video, I want to take a look at some of the things that this synthesizer does that I haven't really seen other synthesizers do, as opposed to give you a general overview of how the synthesizer works, because I know there's many different synthesizers out there. And I know that there's also a lot of people out there that just know how a general synthesizer is going to work and is going to be laid out. So I think focusing on the features that are unique to the synthesizer is going to be much more interesting. We are going to do that in the context of making a sound though, because I am actually working on the track, as you can see. So we're going to use Spline exactly for that purpose. So what we obviously need to start with is trying to get a nice tone out of it. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to select a wavetable. As you can see, currently I'm running the beta version, so there aren't a whole lot of wavetables available. I do believe that for the final release, more wavetables are going to be available because I'm still running an earlier beta version. One of the cool things is that some of the wavetables in this plugin are actually made by yours truly. I believe this might be one of them, but I'm not entirely certain. What I am certain of is that there's a lot of cool, interesting ways of manipulating these wavetables. First of all, as you can see, there's a whole bunch of different modes over here that you can choose from. So for example, we can go with phase distort here. And then the morph is actually going to be the phase distortion amount. So there's a lot of potential for some really cool FM sounds coming from this. And then we also have morph B, which is going to be a secondary parameter for this process over here. In this case, it is literally just morphing between the 2 versions. But this is a cool way of getting a little bit of the original sound back in there. Now, as you can see, this is an XY path, which is really interesting because you can just quickly set different tones here. And kind of control 2 different parameters at once. But right-clicking and going into spline mode also allows you to do some interesting modulation stuff with that. As you can see, you can use these points to draw in paths. And you can see we have a source over here. As well as some other parameters here, like the rotation. Just like stretching it and moving it a little bit. Stretching it up and down, left and right. It would be really cool if you could modulate these parameters here. And this is for open and closed circuits. So this way it is going to circle around the path like that. And this way it is also going to do that, but there's going to be a jump in there. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to use LFO1 here, and I'm just going to set it to free running so that it's always going to play. And you can hear that already we get some really interesting modulation capabilities just out of that. Maybe changing the wavetable that it's using here. Now next up, let's go through the filter here. And currently I would say that the filter selection is falling a little bit short in my opinion. These are just your standard kind of filters, and then one format filter and a cone plus and negative filter here. If you compare that with something like Serum or even Vital, then those have a much bigger offering in the amount of filters that are actually available. So I would love to see in a future update having more filter types in there, and also some very just needed filters in my opinion, like for example a bandpass 24 dB per octave. But let's actually use the bandpass 12 here. And what we can now do is use LFO2. We can draw in an interesting shape. Let's set this to over here. And then I'm going to set this again to free running. And we're just going to go to the assignment over here. And then you just click and drag on the parameters that you want to modulate. This is actually quite a nice system. You can just quickly do multiple modulations like this. You can also, for example, do it to the morph. Let's set this a little bit lower and give it a bit of drive. Now let's combine this with another oscillator. I'm going to use oscillator 3 here. And as you can see, if I turn on an oscillator, we have a routing section that is going to open up. This is really interesting to show you exactly what is going on. And I find this much more intuitive than just like your switches that you have over here. What we can do is have oscillator 3 go over here. And we can make sure that it doesn't go here so that we have 2 versions in parallel. This guy is going to go to the effects and to the output as well. And then this is just going to be our high pass. And we're going to have here maybe a different wavetable. And let's have this guy do, I don't know, spectral RNG here. That is sounding interesting, but we can take this, move it here. I'm so used to the way that Serum does it that I just immediately start dragging from over here, but that is not how this plugin works. Let's actually set this to a low pass. Kind of do it like this. Drive it a bit as well. Let's also give this a little bit of unison. A little bit lower on the modulation amount. And this is sounding very interesting up until this point, but what I would like to do is obviously beef that up a little bit and make it sound a lot more interesting by using effects. And that is what we can do over here. So first of all, I'm going to use some distortion. Again, a few extra distortion types would be nice. Let's actually go for the fold in this one and just do something like this. They do sound really nice, but it gives a little bit of extra high frequencies, which I don't necessarily want. So I'm just going to use a filter to remove those. Now we can use, say, a delay over here. Set this to time mode and set this very low. There we get our nice stereo effect coming from it. Adding a bit of chorus can also help there. Little bit of an extra modulation coming from the phaser would also be cool. We don't want it to be too strong, but we can definitely have a little bit of strength coming from that together with the flanger. Let's compress all of that together. And finally, let's use an EQ to remove the lowest frequencies. I'm just going to go 24 dB gain down, and just like this. And we give it a little bit of extra reverb as well. And that's a lot more interesting than the stuff that we had coming from the oscillators, but really the interesting stuff comes when you start to play with turning these effects off and on and starting to assign different modulations. And that is where the enablements comes in. And this is a really cool thing that I haven't really seen any other synthesizer do. Let's just turn this on and let's set up a few different things here. So for example, we can set up the phaser, we can go with the flanger, we can go with the chorus, we can also go with voice oscillator 3 here. You can have these different oscillators kind of turning off and on, because that is what this is going to do. We can have modulation 1 and modulation 2 over here, and we can assign these to a bunch of different parameters, like for example the reverb mix, but also its decay, this guy's gain, and its frequency, so that it turns up into a higher frequency and it gives it a little bit of a boost in a certain area. We can have this guy also go down and this frequency up right here. And then we can have the phaser feedback change and the centers change a little bit. Just set up a whole bunch of different assignments. Same is going to be true for the mod here. We're going to set depth. We're going to set rate. We're going to set the drive up and the mix down. We're going to get this guy up here. And then also in the synthesis, of course, we could do different things like turning the morph down over here and giving both of these filters a little bit of extra resonance. And now what we can do is we can brighten patterns just for all of these by clicking certain things off. So I'm trying to be as random as possible, even though technically speaking, human behavior isn't really going to be random. We always try to brighten patterns as much as we can. Get rid of a few more oscillator ones. And what I'm also going to do is I'm going to have a modulation 4 that's going to accompany the removal of modulation 1 here. So it's going to do the exact opposite of this row. Here, 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 here. And that just is going to allow us to boost it up in the amp, making sure that we have a little bit of volume still coming through here. Right now we have oscillator 3 also turned off. So let's just turn on oscillator 2 and have that do something as well. Just setting up some modulations on it so that there's some interesting stuff that it does. And as you can hear, with just really one main modulation and the enablements, we get a whole wide range of different sound combinations out of this. And that is where a system like this, where you're just clicking things on and off, is really powerful. Now, of course, there's also other assignments that we can make. As you can see, we have a whole bunch of random stuff over here. We have your pitch bend, mod wheel, and then we have our modulation stuff for macros and whatnot, and another XY controller here. This is really cool if you're doing live performance, and that way you have control again over 2 different parameters. So you have your macro X and your macro Y over here to assign to different parameters. Some other thing of notes that I haven't shown is how the mod matrix looks. So this is the mod matrix when you have some actual modulations assigned. You can see it is fairly easy to read, which is nice. Scrolling on these things also changes just parameter amounts, which is obviously handy if you want that. Another cool thing that I've never really seen before is that scaling is not just by the parameter that you select here. So let's say that we want to use some of the macros here, these guys, macro 1, for scaling some of the modulations that we're doing. It is not just scaling by this amount here, but you can actually set the amount of scaling that each of these guys is going to apply to the modulation that you set over here. Now I do want to work on getting this sound to actually work in the track that I'm working on. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to record a whole bunch of different versions of this. And what I'll also do is I'll load up a different plugin just to mess with it a little bit more. So let's go with Shaperbox here. I'm just going to get myself one of these presets over here that really messes up your sound. Maybe this guy is going to be cool. And what we're going to do is we're going to lay out a big, nice MIDI clip here. Play notes that are going to be, say, like this. And I'll play it like this, in this pattern. So that way we're going to have it out of sync with some of the modulations in Shaperbox. And then I'm just going to record that from here. So recording that, we are able to get the best version out of that. So recording that, we should be able to get the best version out of that. Definitely some cool sounds in here already. That's a cool one. I think I'm going to go with that. And I want this to be here in the track. I actually need it to be shorter, like this. And all we need is a little bit of delay to make that work. and just mixing it in with a little bit of EQ to make sure that it doesn't have too many lower or higher frequencies. I do really like that nice high frequency texture that we're getting out of it. And then I'm going to make sure that it stops delaying in the fill here. And that should be a cool way to go into this part of the track. Of course, there's also other sounds playing in there, but it's a nice extra detail. And with that, this sound is going to be done, which means that it's now time to talk a little bit about what I actually think about this synth. Because at its price point, being introduced at 70 bucks and going up to 99 bucks, I think this is a really nice mid-range synth. I wouldn't put this up at the same level as a synthesizer like Serum or Faceband or Omnisphere or something like that. I even think it holds up decently well with stuff like Vital. Of course, Vital is a free plugin for the most part, but there is the Pro version, which is 80 bucks, which in terms of price point is in a similar range. But I do think in this synthesizer, there's a few different things that need to be addressed a little bit. One of the things that I do think really needs to be updated is the way that the modulation assignment works. As you could see, I was dragging in the wrong place. And I think that should just be the place where if there is a button that lights up, you click there and then you have the ability to slide. I do really like that sliding system over the drag and drop system. I think that is going to be faster for assigning multiple modulations. And assigning one modulation is still going to be equally fast as just dragging and dropping stuff. But honestly, there haven't been a lot of synthesizers that I've tested from the very early days of the release that didn't have these kind of similar issues. And I can definitely see this synthesizer grow into something amazing. Of course, if you want to test it for yourself, there is going to be a free demo available. This is going to be one of those demos that just outputs a little bit of noise temporarily, so you can test it as long as you want. And if you do that, while you're testing it, make sure that you check out some of the presets made by yours truly as well. Not only did I supply some of my wavetables, but I also supplied some presets. So overall, really nice mid-level synthesizer, as I would say. It isn't too simple and it's also not complex that you get instantly lost in all of its features. But that's going to be the video for today. I hope that you enjoyed this new look into a new synthesizer. If you did, make sure that you leave a like on the video, and while you're down there, please make sure that you subscribed and turn on bell notifications as well. Another way to support my channel is by becoming a member. You can do that either here directly on YouTube or on my Patreon or by becoming a Twitch subscriber. All three of those are going to get you into the Discord premium section where you're going to get a whole bunch of benefits like early access to videos, promo codes for my products and stream replays. So thank you if you do that. I hope to see you in the next one. Bye bye.